Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Lady Courts a Marquess by Jillian Eaton, narrated by Heather Wilds. Prologue. Lily and Grove Dress Shop, London, England. It was a known fact that whenever Lady Harmsworth had a titillating piece of gossip to divulge, she had a tendency to flush, and that morning, as she marched through the front doors of Lily and Grove Dress Shop, her entire face was the approximate shade of an overripe tomato. "You are never going to believe what I just learned," she exclaimed. Her bosom bouncing, she threw her arms into the air with great dramatic flair. "If you've come to tell us about the Duke and Duchess of Southwark, we've already heard," said Lady Farthing, muffling a yawn. "Their reconciliation is already old news." "I think it's wonderful." This from Lady Topple, the only spinster in the trio. Despite already being 25, she still clung to the hope that her future husband was out there, somewhere, and he had a great affinity for cats. True love won out in the end, as it is meant to. "Maybe for them," said Lady Harmsworth, arching a heavily plucked brow. "But what about the Earl and Countess of Radcliffe?" Lady Farthing visibly perked as she stepped off the dais, where she was being fitted for a new gown, and shooed the seamstress away with a curt flick of her wrist. "Oh? What about them?" "Do you mean the Duchess of Southwark's sister?" asked Lady Topple, frowning. It was public knowledge that, despite their meagre social beginnings, Maribel and Katherine Holden had gone on to make excellent matches when they'd married the Duke of Southwark and the Earl of Radcliffe, respectively. While rumours of turmoil had recently followed Maribel, Katherine had thus far escaped all whispers of marital strife. Not an easy thing to do in the ton, where affairs were more plentiful than Lady Topple's cats. Of course, there was the little matter of the tragedy that had occurred right before Lord and Lady Radcliffe were married, but no one talked about that. At least, no one with any sense of self-preservation, for who would dare incur Lord Radcliffe's wrath? The Earl was, in a word, terrifying. Even speaking about him now, in the seclusion of the dress shop, made the fine hairs on Lady Topple's nape stand on edge. "Yes," said Lady Harmsworth, nodding. "That's precisely who I mean. I just heard from Lady Green, who heard from Lady Henley, who heard from Lady Button—" "Get on with it!" Lady Farthing snapped. As the mother of 6 unruly children, she'd lost her patience years ago. Occasionally it could be found in the bottom of a wine bottle, but she made a point of never drinking before noon, except on Mondays, and Wednesdays, and some Saturdays. But this happened to be Tuesday, and that meant she had another 3 hours of sobriety to endure. Lady Harmsworth pursed her lips. "Well, suffice it to say, I have it on excellent first-hand authority." "First-hand?" Lady Farthing said incredulously. "You just prattled off half the members of the Grosvenor Square Historical Society. Agatha, do you want to hear about the divorce or not?" "Lord and Lady Radcliffe are petitioning for a divorce," Lady Topple gasped. "No, they can't be." "Oh, but they can." Lady Harmsworth couldn't have looked more like the cat that had got the cream if she'd suddenly sprouted whiskers. "And according to Lady Green, per Lady Henley, per Lady Buttonwood—" "Shoot me now," Lady Farthing groaned. "That is exactly what the Countess of Radcliffe intends to do." Lady Topple sank into the nearest chair and shook her head in disbelief. "I can hardly believe it. An affair, perhaps, even a separation, like the Duke and Duchess of Southwark had, but a divorce? It's unheard of." "Parliament will never allow it," said Lady Farthing. "Lord Greer was granted a divorce last year, in addition to the right to remarry," Lady Harmsworth pointed out. "Besides, I certainly wouldn't want to be the one who tries to tell the Earl of Radcliffe what he can and cannot do, especially after what he already did." "You shouldn't speak of such things, Agatha," said Lady Farthing. Lady Topple nodded in mute agreement. Lady Harmsworth rolled her eyes. "Why not? Everyone already knows. Just because it is not discussed openly doesn't mean it didn't happen. Personally, I don't blame poor Lady Radcliffe for trying to escape him before it happens to her. He wouldn't dare do it again, Lady Topple whispered, aghast. Would he? You know what they say, Lady Harmsworth said with a shrug. Once a murderer, always a murderer. He killed one woman and got away with it. What's to stop him from killing another? Chapter 1. April, 1813. 12 Hill Street, Mayfair District. What do you mean you won't go forward with the divorce? Kitty demanded, driving her heel into the carpeted floor as she glared at her husband. He was sitting upright on his large canopied bed, an open book on his lap and a full glass of brandy on the table beside him. In the muted candlelight, his features appeared even sharper and more forbidding than normal. Handsome, yes. The Earl of Radcliffe was almost impossibly handsome, but there was a ruthless edge to all of that brooding beauty, an edge she'd sliced herself open on more than once. "It's late, Katherine," William sighed, and he knew that she hated it when he called her that, which only served to spike her temper higher. "Can we get some sleep and address this in the morning?" She shouldn't have come in here. They kept separate chambers for a reason, and it wasn't due to goodwill. For while the Countess and Earl of Radcliffe presented a united front outside Hill House, their London manor, inside of it, they'd taken to keeping as far apart as two people could be, while still living under the same roof. But if the first glass of wine she'd imbibed in the parlour downstairs had bolstered her courage, then the second had spurred her into action, and since she'd already climbed the stairs. "We can address it now," she seethed. "There will be no divorce." He gave a casually, infuriatingly dismissive wave of his arm. "There. It's done." A myriad of emotions swirled through Kitty's body at her husband's proclamation. Fury, hopelessness, anguish. "But you said," she began before he cut her off with an impatient snarl. "I was not being serious, Katherine. I spoke of divorce in a moment of anger. You know as well as I that it isn't a feasible option." "It could be," she persisted stubbornly. "If we petitioned the courts—" "No," he said flatly. "But you don't want to be married to me." The wine bubbled to the tip of her tongue, putting words there that sobriety kept at bay. "Not when you love her." William closed the book he'd been pretending to read with a violent snap. "I said I don't care to speak of her." "Why not?" Kitty said shrilly. "She's always right here, whether we speak of her or not. In our house, in our carriage, in our bed. She's here all the time, and I, for one, am sick of it. I won't live like this, William. I won't have 3 people in this marriage when I only said vows to one." A thundercloud rolled across the Earl of Radcliffe's countenance. When it had cleared, he raised his hand in the air and crooked his finger. "Come here, Katherine." "I don't want to," she said, shaking her head from side to side. "Katherine." "Fine." Her feet dragged over the floor as she obeyed his summons. His arm shot out and he caught her around the waist, swinging her easily up and onto his lap. At first, she wanted to deny him, to resist the traitorous feelings swirling around inside of her. Feelings of lust, of longing, of desire. But it was a futile endeavour. Her mind may have hated William, but her body was helpless to resist him. And while they didn't have any of the other traits that made for a good marriage, love, trust, respect, they had this. They'd always had this, sheer, unadulterated passion. William's book fell to the floor with a soft thump as she straddled him, her ivory nightdress skimming to the tops of her thighs, while the blue wrapper she'd donned before daring to enter her husband's bedroom followed the direction of the book. He cupped her jaw on a low rasp of breath as she leaned toward him, her breasts, unbound by constraint or corset, rubbing against the rigid expanse of his chest. "Kitty," he murmured, and she melted into his kiss, her lips parting to welcome the bold slide of his tongue, while hers flicked into the cavern of his mouth, where she tasted the warm oak of brandy and the barest hint of peppermint. She slid her fingers through his hair, nails gliding along thick, silky wheaten tendrils, before anchoring at his nape when the kiss deepened and he yanked her closer to the hot, hard heat of his loins. Sparks, bright as fireworks exploding over Vauxhall Gardens, ignited in her belly as she rubbed herself along his throbbing length, a moan of frustration stealing from her lips at the rough, restrictive barrier of the trousers he preferred to wear to bed in place of a nightshirt. Her fingers left his hair to fumble at the row of brass buttons holding his manhood captive, but before she could unfasten the first one, he lifted his hips, simultaneously dropping her onto the mattress whilst yanking his trousers off. Naked, he pounced, his lean, muscular body enveloping hers in an iron embrace. "We said we wouldn't do this again," he said harshly, his brown eyes burning black as he wavered between desire and restraint, a battle that Kitty had no intention of fighting. "We lied," she purred, arching her spine off the bed to bring them together. A flash of fire, a rumbling growl of assent, and the Earl of Radcliffe, renowned for his self-control, captured her mouth in a bruising kiss, while one of his fingers parted the curls below her navel to slide seamlessly inside her velvet sheath. She clenched around him, her wet muscles contracting, and carried his groan of approval deep into the base of her throat. Bowing his head, he took her nipple into his mouth and sucked in tandem with the glide of his hand, establishing a rhythm of ebb and flow that had her writhing shamelessly atop the linen coverlet. The wall sconces on either side of the bed began to sputter, as on top of the mattress Kitty and William's desire soared to new heights. She panted his name, and then cried it when his fingers drove her over the edge, but before her nerve endings could find a soft landing amidst the heady thrum of pleasure, he flipped her over onto her side and entered her from behind, his hand biting into the curve of her hip as he buried his staff to the hilt in a thrust that robbed them both of their breath in the very best way. She closed her eyes and saw flashes of light, bursts of colour that exploded across an ebony swathe of starless night. This was how it had always been when she was wrapped in William's arms. It was when she was out of them that the trouble began. But there was no room to think about that here, in this sacred place, in this sacred moment, when their bodies were entwined and their skin was slick with perspiration and passion. "Katherine," he rasped into her ear, and this time the sound of her full name didn't annoy as much as it enthralled. He pushed her hair to the side and kissed the side of her neck, the soft, intimate gesture making her toes curl, even as the rest of her demanded more. He thrust again, and her entire back bowed, lust humming through her veins. Bracing an arm above her head, she flattened her palm against the engraved mahogany headrest as he withdrew, then drove forward, carrying her right up to the brink, and then over it on a sharp cry of release. She might have said his name. She wasn't sure. She wasn't sure of anything as her vision blurred and warmth flowed through her body in a soft, dewy unravelling, the first blush of sunlight after a long, cold night. He sought his own satisfaction immediately after, his breath hot and harsh against her nape, while his abdomen contracted, and he pulled her tight against him, merging them together until it was impossible to tell where he ended and she began. And for the tick of a minute, for the length of a minuscule eternity, they clung to each other, to what had been their past, however brief, to what would never be in the future. He stroked her hair, gently combing out the tangles. She closed her eyes and ran her fingers along the arm he had draped over her side, allowing her defences to weaken and waver in the afterglow of a desire that refused to be denied. She didn't want to want William, not like this, not with an insatiable hunger she felt in her bones, in her very being. It would be easier, so much easier, if their physical appetites had waned along with their tolerance for each other. But it was as if the harder she tried to untangle herself from him, from their empty husk of a marriage, the stronger the bonds of their lust became. And it was tempting, oh so tempting, to settle for this, to let these stolen nights fueled by fury and frustration be enough, to let their passion be enough. But she wasn't going to be her mother. She wasn't going to settle for crumbs when she deserved the entire bloody pie. If William couldn't give her all of himself, then she would take none of him. Tonight was just another mistake, another lapse in judgment, as was the night 2 days ago and the afternoon a week before that. 7 months' worth of mistakes. But her biggest mistake was ever agreeing to marry William in the first place. Stiffening, she began to withdraw from his embrace, and after a token display of resistance, he lifted his arm, watching with a shuttered, unreadable gaze while she gathered her belongings. "You're going to your room," he said. "Yes." She held her nightdress to breasts that still throbbed from his kisses. "I want a divorce, William." A muscle ticked in his jaw. "You can want it all you like. My answer remains the same." Anger and the vestiges of desire quickly cooling brought twin splashes of pink colour to her cheeks. "But we're miserable together. Why not separate and find happiness individually?" "It's out of the question." "William!"
"Go!"
His thunderous roar made her eyes widen. William's emotions ran deep, and he rarely let them rise to the surface, but when he did, the heavens rumbled.
"If you cannot abide my bed, if you cannot abide me, then go, Katherine. Seek your own room. Seek your own company. But you'll do it under the goddamn roof that we both share. As husband and fucking wife. Is that understood?"
Glaring, she drove her heel into the floor and quit the room without another word. Chapter 2. 5 days later. 12 Hill Street, Mayfair District. Kitty woke in a mood. This, in and of itself, was not remarkable. Blessed, or cursed, depending on the day, with a volatile temper, Kitty often found herself mired in some sort of mood. Unlike her older sister Mara, who held her emotions at arm's length, Kitty wore what she was feeling on the edge of her sleeve. She always had, even when she tried not to. Even when she bit her tongue so hard it bled. A consequence, she supposed, of being raised in a household where contrary opinions, or opinions of any sort really, weren't only not permitted, they were punished. While black and blue bruises had bloomed on top of Mara's skin when she took the blows meant for both of them, guilt had festered under Kitty's. It had twisted and tangled into long, stringy weeds, until she had an entire garden's worth of shame running through her veins. It was that shame, the secret hidden garden of atrocities, which had initially propelled her toward William, toward an earl that society said she couldn't have, toward a husband that her heart had wanted in spite of the shrill warnings from her head. And wasn't that fitting? Wasn't that just bloody wonderful, because now William was the one man she wanted to escape? Unfortunately, it still wasn't going very well, thus explaining the mood. "What do you mean he's not here? Where is he then?" she growled at Stevens, William's personal valet and gatekeeper. He was short and stout, with a bald head and a series of lines across his temple that had a tendency to deepen with disapproval whenever she entered his line of sight. Ever since Kitty had become the Countess of Radcliffe, she and Stevens had found themselves at odds. Before then, really, as he'd closed the door in her face not once, not twice, but 3 times. The self-important little toad. He couldn't lock her out of the house any longer, but he did take glib delight in refusing to divulge his employer's whereabouts. And to Kitty, for whom outward appearance was everything, having a servant openly defy her was, well, it was infuriating. Almost as infuriating as being ignored by her husband. "I am sorry, my lady." Stephen squared his shoulders and stared at a spot on the wall directly behind her right ear. "Lord Radcliffe has yet to return from his previous outing. I could not say with certainty where he is at the moment, and would not care to speculate in regard to his whereabouts." Kitty gritted her teeth. "But we had a meeting planned for noon, and it's already 1:30. It's not like Lord Radcliffe to be tardy." Stephen's brown gaze met hers for an instant, then swept away with a dismissive flick that made her grind her teeth even harder. "I'm afraid you're likely mistaken on the time. Come to think of it, I do not recall any such meeting in his daily schedule of events. Perhaps it's for tomorrow." "We both know it's not for tomorrow, Stevens." She glared at him, daring him, willing him to commit a truly dismissible worthy offence, but as per usual the valet was well aware of right where the line was and how to keep his webbed toes on the correct side of it. "When you see my husband, kindly remind him that my time is just as valuable as his, and I don't like to have it wasted. "Of course, my lady." Stephen smiled. She smiled back. "Thank you." They both turned away, knowing that Stevens would never do anything of the sort, and after donning her pelisse and bonnet, Kitty stepped outside into the warm spring air, inhaling the sweet floral scents of lilacs and daffodils. It was a marvellous English spring. Clear blue skies, chirping birds, blooming wisteria. Everywhere she looked, people were smiling and children were laughing. Even the stray dogs were wagging their tails. Why, then, did she feel like a bucket of lead was lodged in the middle of her chest, so heavy that when she walked, the heels of her shoes dragged along the ground? Adjusting the wide brim of her straw poke bonnet, so that she wouldn't have to make eye contact with random passers-by, Kitty adopted a brisk pace that further discouraged conversation and directed her steps toward Bond Street. If there was anything guaranteed to raise her spirits, it was shopping, specifically shopping with her husband's coin. If she couldn't get William's attention one way, then by God, she'd try another, and buy herself a few presents in the process. By the third store, she was feeling marginally better. By the fifth, she had begun to smile. By the seventh, she was positively beaming. "Put the diamond necklace on Lord Radcliffe's account," she said airily, turning in a circle inside the glittering confines of Longfellow's jewellery emporium. "And the matching bracelet on my wrist. I prefer to wear it out." "Yes, my lady." The owner, Mr. Longfellow, a shrewd businessman who had recognised a woman in need of spending a small fortune the instant Kitty walked into the store, snapped his fingers. "You heard the Countess. She'd like to wear the bracelet out. Remove it from the case at once, and have the necklace wrapped for delivery." He paused. "Lady Radcliffe, before you depart, it would be remiss if I did not show you our most exclusive item. It came yesterday, and has not even been put out on display yet." "Oh?" Kitty asked, a golden brow rising as she held out her wrist to one of the shop assistants. "What is it?" "A brooch," said Mr. Longfellow in a hushed voice, "rumoured to have been worn by Lady Isabel Laurent, and gifted to her by none other than the Duke of Somerville during his marriage to Princess Antoinette of Luxembourg. It's a priceless piece, an heirloom really, but her descendants have fallen on hard times, I'm afraid, and—" "Everything has a price when you're pushed hard enough," Kitty interrupted, ignoring the twinge in the centre of her chest courtesy of the wire wrapped around her heart that had been tightening ever since her wedding night. She gave an imperious lift of her chin. "Show it to me." Mr. Longfellow disappeared behind a velvet curtain for several minutes. When he returned, he was carrying a small black box. Setting it on the glass counter, he removed the lid with reverence to reveal a red ruby brooch surrounded by diamonds. "If I may be so bold, Lady Radcliffe, the colouring would look exquisite paired with your complexion." The brooch was beautiful, stunning even, a truly remarkable piece, but as Kitty, who naturally coveted all things pretty, stared at the brooch, she didn't feel impressed or in awe. Instead, she felt slightly nauseous, because while the brooch was lovely, the story of how it had come to be was not. Princess Antoinette had given her husband 15 children, and this was how he had her toil and allegiance repaid, by giving a priceless gemstone to his mistress. Maybe if she didn't know what it was like to be chosen second by the one man in all the world who should have chosen her first, it wouldn't have mattered, but she did know, and it did matter. It mattered very much. "I'm not interested," she said, turning her head away. "But, my lady—" "Did I stutter, Mr. Longfellow, or otherwise make myself unclear?" Her voice cracked across the shop like a whip, freezing everyone in their tracks and revealing that despite her diminutive stature, Kitty was capable of exuding great force. If her sister's anger was a woeful gale, then hers was a wild tempest, howling and raging as it crashed upon the shore, destroying everything in its path. When she was a child, her temper had been impossible to control and had earned her more slaps and bruises than she cared to remember. As she'd gotten older, she had learned the benefit of harnessing its power, of portraying herself as a sweet, agreeable woman, until it no longer served her best interest. Because if there was one thing she would never do again, it was make herself weak or vulnerable to anyone. Not to a shopkeeper, not to her husband, not even to her dead father. The monster whose vicious hands had sent her running into the arms of a suitor incapable of loving her. so long as he loved another. But she'd married William anyway, for what choice did she have when she loved him? It was a mistake that had caused her more misery over the past 7 months than all the years she'd endured living under her father's fist combined. Black and blue marks faded with time, but heartache... Kitty's mouth twisted in a bitter smile. Heartache endured when nothing else did. "Have my purchases wrapped and delivered by end of day," she said coolly. "I'm sure you know the address." Sunlight shimmered off her new bracelet as she departed the shop, stopping to allow a flower seller with a wooden cart overflowing with tulips to pass by. She turned blindly to the left with no specific destination in mind. The brooch and the thoughts it had invoked, having soured her desire for baubles and bonnets. She'd find another way to gain William's notice. Maybe she'd buy an elephant and move it into his study. Or maybe she'd threaten to take a lover, as her sister had done. Except William liked animals. He kept an entire pack of hounds at their country estate, in addition to a stable filled with fine thoroughbreds. And she doubted he'd care if she became another man's mistress, so long as she was discreet about it. What had worked to fix her sister's marriage was not going to work to fix her own, because there was nothing left to fix. Nothing but hurt, resentment, and anger. It hadn't started off that way, Kitty reflected, as she sought temporary respite on a bench in the shade of a flowering cherry, its branches heavy with pink blooms. Tragedies didn't begin with heartbreak. No. For a relationship to be truly tragic, it had to start with hope, with happiness, with the alluring promise of true love. A good tragedy made you fly before it let you fall, and my, how had she flown, high enough to touch the clouds and beyond, to the stars. Their story had begun, as most did, with a look across a crowded ballroom, a look that had lasted less than a second, a look that had promised her heaven before sending her plunging straight into hell. Chapter 3. May 1811. Havisham Ball, London, England. Kitty wore blue to the ball. The fetching colour complemented the rosy blush of her cheeks, and her yellow silken curls piled artfully around a tiara adorned with diamonds. Only she knew that the gown was an old one of her mother's. The diamonds were made of glass, and that she'd purposefully worn elbow-length gloves to cover the light spattering of bruises that encircled her wrist, like a ghastly purple bracelet. Her entire appearance was an illusion designed to fool her peers into believing she was something that she wasn't. She was an actress. The Havisham Ball was her stage, and she was about to put on the performance of a lifetime. She heard the whispers as she glided past her peers, holding a long-stemmed glass of champagne, as if she hadn't a care in the world. "I thought it would be her," they said. "The poor dear must be so embarrassed. At least she can be supported in spinsterhood by her sister." Kitty's top lip curled at the last, a dog preparing to bite, but she managed to school her expression into a pleasant smile before her fangs showed. Spinsterhood! She was barely 20. And older siblings were meant to marry before the younger. But when that older sibling was engaged to marry the Duke of Southwark, it cast a long shadow, a shadow that was impossible to fill, given this season's worm-riddled crop of bachelors. And the worst of it was that they were right. It should have been her getting married first. It should have been her marrying a duke. She was the fashionable one, the sociable one, the one that had gotten her and Mara invitations to the bloody Glendale ball in the first place. But instead of noticing her, Southwark had set his sights on Mara. Sweet, quiet, bookish Mara, who hadn't even been looking for a husband. Now Mara was almost a duchess, and Kitty was already being labelled as a spinster. The unfairness of it made her stomach hurt, but she wasn't about to resolve herself to the fate that the Ton had already decided for her. Absolutely not. She hadn't come this far to give up, and she damn well hadn't come this far to settle for being known as the sister of a duchess. Tilting her head back, Kitty drained the contents of her champagne flute in a single swallow. The bubbles prickled on her tongue before sliding pleasantly down her throat and into her belly, warming her from the inside out. Removing a silk fan from her beaded reticule, another piece of her patched-together wardrobe inherited from her mother, she flicked it open and used the scalloped edge to disguise the direction of her stare as she studied the men in attendance. The Duke and future Duchess of Southwark weren't amidst the guests spinning around Lord and Lady Havisham's ballroom. Her sister had bowed out this morning, citing a megrim, and left Kitty scrambling to find a suitable chaperone.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?